So, hello, it is so wonderful to be talking with my next guest. They are amazing people in the Boston area and have had a pretty broad reach. Roxann and Keith Mascoll are here with us today. And as we continue our series on Black resistance and mental health, we are talking about Black love. And who better to have our host of the Triggered Project with us today to talk about Black love and Black resistance. So what I'm going to have you do, just say a little bit about who you are as your intro, and then we'll get right into our questions today.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having us. It's always a pleasure to sit down and talk to you, my Bayesian sister. So
that's right.
Yeah. That's what always makes this special. Knowing that, mental health is something that we don't talk about enough in our culture. So it's always a pleasure to talk to you. But my name is Keith Mascoll. I'm an actor, producer, mental health advocate, a sneakerhead, must be said, and the founder of the Triggered Project, where I am telling my story as a survivor of sexual abuse and using my art in 3 different ways. With a one-man show called Triggered Life. It's co-written by me and the great John Alawale Adekoje. I have a podcast with my wife, which what we'll be talking about today, called Living a Triggered Life. And then also offering workshops. And then we have a inner monologue and sneaker art project that we do as well. So we're really using art in 3 different ways to bring awareness. And now we'll move into providing programming. So really excited to be here and have this conversation about Black love.
Excellent. And Roxann.
Hi, I'm Roxann Mascoll, and I work as a psychotherapist. I'm a licensed, independent licensed social worker, and also the lead clinician for the Trigger Project, and co-host of the podcast with this guy over here. And and just because we're talking about culture, I want to make sure I socially locate myself with these 2 Bayesians.
Right?
Because you have
not to be outdone, right?
So out in the world, I say Afro-Caribbean, but I'm really a Black Nuyorican, which is a Puerto Rican with that experience from New York, growing up in the New York life.
That's right. I love it. Love it. Thank you. And again, I just see all the amazing work. I love, Roxann, you are a mental health professional. Keith, you're a mental health advocate and using your platform and your lived experience to really elevate these conversations. So again, thank you for being here, and let's get into it. So my first question for you is, what was going on in the community that that inspired you or propelled you to start living a triggered life?
I think that with the work of the Triggered Project in general, there wasn't enough people talking about sexual abuse in Black and men. Mm-hmm. And there were too many of my cousins that experienced the same thing on one side, mm-hmm. and looking at the collateral damage and the effects that it had on the men on the other side of my family really got me really inspired to start talking about it. Mm-hmm. But also just for me personally, it was starting to destroy my life. And I needed to make a difference. I needed to make a different choice if I wanted to continue to be in this relationship with this wonderful woman next to me and to be in a relationship with myself. Mm-hmm. And so that's how we started the project. In terms of the podcast, after working on Triggered Life, the show, I felt like there was more to it. Mm-hmm. And we've been in this beautiful long-term relationship, friendship, and marriage for a long time. And people have always asked us how we do it, right? How we get through. And so I thought it was the next step of the show, an extension of the show, to talk about how it affects how it affected our relationship. But if we could talk about in general of how we've seen through our experience of how it affects everything, every relationship, but looking at the intimate relationship is something that has never been talked about ever. I mean, the special thing about the podcast is that we are in our own lane in so many ways. And yes, we are married and have been for a while, but the relationship that we have and what we talk about is about our friendship, right? It is not exclusive to saying that you have to be have to be married, because we start and go all the way back to the beginning of how we met and where we were, and we try to bring everybody through that journey of evolution of this Black love. But we also understand this. Black love is a political act. And we were very clear about that. So in terms of thinking about resistance, resistance of, mental health, we understand that self-care is resistance. It is a political act. And so why not share more of ourselves to help other people?
Yeah, and I think in that, thank you for sharing that. And I mean, there's so many excellent points you hit about that self-love first, right? Understanding who you are. When you're getting into a relationship with someone, you have to have your own identity, your own sense of self, or else that relationship is not likely to last or be very healthy, particularly if you're not in a healthy place. And then you talk about the coming together, right? And that union and but that friendship being the foundation. So Roxann, when he came to you with this idea, well, I don't know who had the idea first, but and you're like, oh yeah, let's do this. Or they're like,
no.
Brother, are you on something?
He told me like maybe 2 or 3 days before he had booked the studio, and then told me like 2 or 3 days before that we're gonna go do this. And I was like, wait, no, we're not gonna do this. But like, I was like, I just had no words for it. Mm-hmm. But I think that, speaking about resistance, resistance is fighting to stay together. Mm-hmm. And we have fought long and hard. And one thing I want to say about just what people can expect if you haven't heard the podcast is that we talk about love, we talk about resistance, we talk about what our experience of trauma has been, what our experience individually, and how it was tearing us apart, and how we navigated that, and what were the important things that we had to discover for ourselves, but then how we discovered together. Yeah. And sometimes people I think might get a little like swayed with the title, but we have so much fun, and we talk about things that people don't reveal about themselves. Yeah. And that is the offering, right? Really being able to give a piece of ourselves back to our community, so that we can say, hey, y'all, it's not easy, it's possible, right. But relationships are work. And I talk to so many younger folks who really cannot, and then not even just young folks, even older folks, right? Mature folks don't understand this is work.
You must have listened in, and I haven't posted it yet, so I know you haven't, but that is exactly what I say. And this was something a friend of mine early when I was in grad school, she was married and going through, grad school together. And she's like, relationships are work. It's hard work. You have to put the time in, you have to put that commitment in. So you just really elevated that. And, I think it's so important that just all the things you mentioned about, one, the work of it, right? But being honest with each other, and there are going to be hard conversations. There's going to be joy, and there's going to be some tough conversations too along the way. And so how are you setting yourself up to have those conversations? So as you move through this podcast and life together, maybe what are some things, so there are a couple of things that I'm being called to, so pull the one that is pulling you. So what have you learned about how to stay healthy in relationship? I think that's one question. And connected to that, what are some things, if you could I know you guys do a lot of inner child and inner monologue work. So what would you say to your maybe younger self as you're starting out in this relationship? Here are some tips. Here's what we learned. Here's what we might do differently, or knowing that your journey is your journey, right? But, for people who are just starting out there or looking for ways to solidify their relationship or kind of do things over, what are some things that you found that have helped you stay healthy that you would share with folks listening in?
I think one of the things I will say that, again, like people will get in the podcast, and if you know us, we have a really unique sense of humor for each other. And, Keith said something to me the other day, and I'm not going to say the whole thing, but he said, your hair looks like you were boop, 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 in the library. What happened? And, sometimes like a different time in our lives, I would take that as a major injury, and I'd be upset about it because, I feel embarrassed. And now I'm thinking about, man, I've been walking around the world looking like this. I get home and now he's telling me, right? And there was a moment in our lives that I would be really hurt by that because it was feeding into something that was not about him, but it was sort of growing up with a very critical parent and always feeling wrong, right? Always in the wrong, can never. So it would feed into that, and he can attest to it. Things like that would happen, and we would have like fights, like could not sort of get through it because I was so hurt by it. And this time around, I just offered an expletive back and just started laughing, and we laughed together about that. That's the evolution. That's how we've gotten to this place, and that's what we sort of offer. But humor and understanding that sometimes your little self is showing up, and that's your work, not your partner's work, and owning that. But when you're activated and triggered sometimes, and that's where therapy comes in, you need to actually be able to know that that's what's activated in you. Right. And how do you do that by yourself? It's not easy to do that, right? You need somebody. You need the podcast, or you need therapy. You need something.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, first thing I want to say is that I didn't get to say this before really quickly, but doing the podcast is a form of Black love, because one thing I knew is that people missed how brilliant Roxann is. And I mean, just brilliant. And I was clear that I wanted to put her in position so she could be seen in the light that she needs to be seen. You know what I mean? So I made sure that, she had a footprint on social media. And I knew that she would shine with the podcast. So that's the other reason why I did it. I didn't do it, yes, we'll tell our story, but I also did it for her because I love her. And I know she's great. And I knew that once we started talking, that she would just drop gems. And that's what happens every session. But I would say, I'm talking to my younger self, I would say we have to give ourselves a lot of grace, number one. I think we have to look at how we define manhood, to be honest, because that sometimes shapes how we learned about manhood, sometimes shapes how we expect people to show up for us in relationships. So I think that's an important thing to talk about. Yes, talking about our histories and our baggage and what we bring to the relationship is important. I think early on, the strong sense of honesty, Roxann and I, we had to have some conversations, some real conversations about, past relationships and people we've been with and things. And I had a very strong look on, own what you've done, right? Be empowered. If you're a woman and you've had relations with folks, just talk about it. Just own it. It's your choice. It's all good. There's no judgment with that. And I think that that was refreshing. but also just having, we talked on the phone and talked probably almost 5-6 months. And that was actually really, 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 really nice, because I really got to know her. You know what I'm saying? And that made a big difference. So honesty, really talking about, really having real conversations, I think is a big thing. What I would tell my younger self, probably is to try to get in therapy a little bit earlier. I would say probably.
I'll tell your younger self that too.
Right. You know,
I would tell.
Like probably say that. But everything else I wouldn't change, to be honest, because some of the struggles were worth it and are worth it. Yeah. And we spent so much time and had so much fun running between here in New York and Puerto Rico. And those are just great times. And we still are those young kids, so to speak.
Oh, I love that.
And that's everything.
Yeah. So keeping that joy and that playfulness.
Yeah. Like it's like, you know, being at your birthday party and seeing you and Jeff, like you could see the love and the connection, as if there was nobody else in the room on the dance floor but you and him and your love. And that is beautiful, you know? So yes, it's a great thing to witness.
I love that. So you said get a diary earlier, so that journal in peace, right? And part of that reflection is so important. Roxann, you talked about, you know, we didn't say this, but I'll just bring it up right now. Like when you're in a relationship, you know, I do this thing about ancestral mathematics, right? We think about our generations that are behind us and with us everywhere we go. And in that relationship, those will show up too, right? Our families, Roxann, you talked about, you know, growing up with a critical parent, right? So all of these voices and all these people and the relationships we've seen around us comes into play. And so you have to kind of sift through, like, what's other people's stuff and what you want for your relationship. What do you want to bring up? What do you want to highlight in that space?
Right. Sort the mail, I think, is what Roxann.
Oh, I like that. Sort the mail.
That's Roxann. That's a Roxannism right there.
Oh, I love it.
We talked about on the podcast about sorting the mail. But yes, you're absolutely right. We have to make it. We have the ability to make a choice with everything that we've been told, to decide how we want to show up as people in relationships. You know, we almost have to deprogram ourselves. And, you know, I'm a Asian man, so I've heard a lot of things. But I definitely had to decide how I wanted to show up. And that if that worked for us, it didn't make a difference what anybody else said.
Absolutely.
And I just want to add one more element about the younger version of ourselves. I grew really accustomed to who he was in his younger version of him. And, you know, really encouraged him to go to therapy. And that was like a long journey. But then when he actually started going to therapy, I started to also not really appreciate him anymore, because
I'm like laughing here.
This is the real work here, right?
Because he's changing now. He's evolving.
Yeah. And I didn't like it, because I was like, I'm sorry, who are you? I don't know you. And there were like some very specific elements about himself that were changing. And I found myself really struggling. And for a period of time, I just did not like him. And I was like, and my initial sort of thought about it was, what is this therapist doing? Like, what's going on? What is the conversation? What's happening? Because I don't like this change. And it took me a while to realize that was a representation of his version of healing. And the person that I fell in love with was a younger version of him that was maybe not as healthy. But because of how things were communicated to me about his life, or when he decided he wanted to tell me more about what happened in his life, I didn't know that. This was the person, like we had been rolling and we had a rhythm. And then all of a sudden that rhythm wasn't there anymore. And I was like, I don't think I told him this, but I really sometimes had moments of, am I really going to make it through this? Because I don't know that I like this person. And so I had to really kind of sort of assess and find the places where I remember was what love I had for him, and really work to accept this healed version of him, because I did not want to accept it. It wasn't working for me at all.
Yeah, I think it was.
Deep. That is real deep.
Yeah, our trauma kids grew up together, right? And so that response, and how I saw that response was her trauma kid was that was the response of the trauma kid. Right, that wasn't the response of the woman.
Yeah. And I think that is, thank you so much for sharing. I just had chills as you shared that, because as people grow and get healed, they look different, they operate differently, they show up differently. And, I hear people say, oh, you've changed, but it's a good change, right? It's a good change in this. And then you have to figure out, am I going to grow and meet this person where they're at, or I'm going to try to sabotage them so we can stay, as you use your phrase, the trauma kids, so we can stay together. So that requires a lot of growth. And I think in a relationship, people have to need the space to grow and evolve in healthy ways, right? And so you can come back together. But if someone is growing and doing better and you're sabotaging, that's not going to work, right? That is undermining that person's growth and transformation. So as we wrap up here, so we talked about getting a journal, we talked about therapy and evolving, sorting the mail. I love that. Sorting the mail. Roxann, brilliance there. Any last tips? And then, I want to hear what's coming up for you, like anything that, one, how we stay in touch with you all, but also anything that's coming up that we should be looking out for.
I think one of the things we've discovered is that people listen to the podcast on the down low and they don't tell us. So I'm just going to say, although we want to know that people listening, we want feedback, we want to know that what we're offering is beneficial. Even though we had a recent friend say, you guys are giving therapy for free. That's the way, right? We have couple friends that are saying, we were on a road trip and we just listened to all your episodes in the road trip so that we could have a different conversation together, because we were having to spend. And so I think that looking for those opportunities can sort of spark new ideas for ourselves. It doesn't mean that the beginning of someone's journey could just be listening to a podcast or reading an Instagram post, right? So that you can really bring thought and reflection to where you want to be and what your plan is moving forward. I want to make sure that we understand that therapy is a very good option, but was not really created for Black and Brown people. That's not where we showed up. So I want to honor that by saying, be unique, be creative with your healing, get yourself ready to be in a therapy space right now, because there's all this more sort of, we're out there around Black mental health and mental wellness. We have a lot more resources and we can find people that we really feel like we can connect to. And that's fantastic. So take it, pace it, and do it your way, so that you can stick with it. Because we don't do it our way, we're more liable not to stick with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, go ahead.
I was, just to piggyback on that, is people figuring out what their wellness package is, right? All the things that make them happy, right? Where's faith in that? Where is exercise? Where is walking, nature, anything that makes us feel happy? And then figuring out if therapy fits into that is important, right? Understanding that, in relationships, we're responsible for our own mental health and health in general. And that's something that we don't necessarily talk about, right? We always expect our partners to take the lead on that. And that's our responsibility. And that's one thing that's work for us. So I wouldn't be trying to tap her for, helping me or being my therapist in general, and vice versa. Yeah. And that's important to say. We are coming up. We have we're gearing up for season 2 of the podcast, and also to be more of on a regular schedule. We haven't been on a regular schedule by choice, just because there's just so much crap that's out there, that we didn't want to get lost in the shuffle in that way. But we will be on a more of a regular basis. We'll be back at the Museum of Science coming up in May, which we're excited about. And we're going to release the first episode of season 2 next month. So we're excited for that. And we've been doing some interviews this month about Black love. So we're excited to see this. And then the Triggered Project, we've been traveling across the country, having this discussion about Black men and sexual abuse. But also we're out to change how providers and how social workers and even psychologists are learning about the Black family and about Black men and trauma. So our work coming up with Tuskegee, we're really proud about that, on some other colleges. So people can find us on our website, www.triggered1.com, or you can find us on IG through the Triggered Project, or through me, Keith Mascoll, or Living a Triggered Life podcast.
Excellent. We'll make sure that we include all those links so people can reach out to you. So again, thank you so much for being here, for being part of my community, to be in community with each other, support our love unions, and many blessings continuing for you and your journey. And I hope that we continue to crisscross through each other's life as we move through this world together, and really bring mental health and well-being to our communities. And, I want to end, there's a bell hooks quote that I recently got introduced to, and it's a little long, but I'll cut to the point because you mentioned it, you talk about wellness. And she says, this culture makes wellness a white luxury. And to choose against that culture, to choose wellness for ourselves as a Black people, we must be dedicated to the truth and resisting all those lies about who Black men are and who Black men and families are. So again, thank you for being authentically, uniquely you, and sharing your voice, and most of all, sharing your love with us, because we are learning and growing so much from your journey. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.